Truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God.
This is my good friend Alex, and he's going to be sharing with us today portions of his story growing up as a Jehovah's Witness. It's actually a little bit of a funny story as to how we actually discovered that we had a mutual upbringing. Alex is a local star in our area, and as you know from watching my channel for any length of time, Chelsea and I are dancing professionals, so we took part in a local Dancing with the Stars competition. And there was one portion of your experience together where you and Chelsea were talking about, you know, potentially you're trying to raise as much money for this charity as possible. Mm-hmm. And somehow the subject of, well, the only thing left to do at this point is going door to door.
Right.
Right. And then from there, Chelsea was like, well, Brandon's pretty good at that. He could go door to door. He used to be a Jehovah's Witness. And that's when you were like, you know,
It's like, wait a minute, really? Are you serious?
Right, come again.
Right.
That's kind of unique. So that's how we figured out we had that mutual upbringing. So of course, as soon as we figured that out, I was like, okay, man, we got to talk. We got to hear your story, that sort of thing. So I want this to basically be that. I just want this to be, you know, your story. How did you enter into the group? You know, what was some of your upbringing like? Any significant experiences that stood out to you? And then where have you landed now currently, kind of like what your worldview, that type stuff is.
Sure, absolutely.
So we can start, if you'd like, with, you know, how did you get into the group in general? Were you a joiner or born in?
My mom was raised Catholic, okay. And when I was about 5 years old, they came knocking at the door, lovely old couple, and she studied with them for a year or so. She got baptized in 1985. My father was never religious at all, really, and so you know, there was three of us boys, and we all, you know, she drug us to the meetings, and you know, we were kind of quasi in and out because my dad still celebrated all the holidays with his family and stuff. So we'd of course go over there for Christmas and Thanksgiving, and none of the kids wanted to give that stuff up. So, right. But after a few years, that kind of went by the wayside, and us boys were pretty full on going with my mom at all times. My dad later got baptized when I was 15, and you know, he kind of hung around the church there for years, mm-hmm. you know, going to functions and picnics and the memorial and things of that nature. But I have an older brother who's a year older than me, and then a younger brother who's 5 years younger than me. So he was just born right when my mom was getting baptized. But, you know, so we grew up as witnesses, actually had a great upbringing. Mm-hmm. My parents, you know, were just great parents in general, mm-hmm. I think. They were married, they were together 49 years till my mom passed 2 years ago. And so, you know, I was blessed to have just a great upbringing. Mm-hmm. And I think the church actually played a part in that, at least as far as, you know, the social settings. I mean, there was never in want of friends. Mm-hmm. I was best man at 4 weddings, you know, when I was in my late teens, when everybody seemed to be getting married, early 20s. So I had a lot of really good friends growing up. I got personally baptized as a member when I was 12.
Okay. Wow, 12, that's really early.
Yeah, I got some thoughts on that nowadays, mm-hmm. Since my daughter, who's about to be 8, has, you know, mentioned baptism and mm-hmm. At the kind of church that we've been going to recently. And you know, at the time, you were kind of, you know, it's like if you weren't baptized by the time you were in your mid-teens, something, you know, you weren't doing something right.
Something was off. Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, it was a big deal. We had a party mm-hmm. after I was baptized, you know, and my mom was just very active, mm-hmm. you know, in the church. I mean, when she passed away 2 years ago, there was over 500 people that came to her to the memorial of her,
Yeah.
her death. So that gives you kind of an idea of how beloved she was
Right.
as a, if she was a man, she would have been an elder for sure.
Yeah.
In the church, she was just definitely someone that everybody looked to. But my older brother never got baptized.
Okay.
My younger brother did, but we, like I said, we grew up in it. It was, it was my life for sure. All my best friends. Even high school, I didn't hang out with anybody from high school. It was everybody only in the church. I ended up getting married when I was 19 to a witness girl, and that was a big deal. I was a good guy. Her dad called the elders from my church, and they gave me the thumbs up, and I was exemplary in the church, and so everything was great. Everything seemed to just be rolling along wonderfully, until my marriage only lasted 3 years.
Okay. So 19 to about 21 or
22. Yeah. Yes, actually I just turned 20. I took that back when I had gotten married. And that was a situation. We had both families highly involved. Her dad was an elder. I mean, everything was, couldn't I really ask for a better situation, for support from the church, support from families. And, so my story really goes that I screwed up. And there was infidelity in the relationship. And I ended up getting disfellowshipped immediately. I mean, it wasn't even really a question.
Right.
And she moved back to North Carolina immediately. Her parents came, swooped her up, and took her back down there immediately. And and that kind of started my demise, I guess, maybe in the church, whatever you want to call it. Although I never missed a meeting.
Yeah.
For that year, I went to every single meeting. I made my way back in the, I guess there's some pre-described year-long thing to get back.
It's like,
or was at the time.
it's like 8 months to 12 months for sure. And that's in the, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Elder's Manual. They call it the Shepherd the Flock of God book, but it's not a book that you would be able to get. Like if you went up to the literature counter and you said, "Can I get the Shepherd the Flock of God book?" They'd look at you like you had two heads.
Right.
Especially if it was an elder, he'd be like, "Where'd you hear about that?"
Yeah.
So yeah, but there is definitely a prescribed amount of time, and they even have descriptions of how long the punishment should last, depending on if this is a first, second, third, or fourth offense.
Gotcha.
So it gets pretty detailed as far as like, what happens during that procedure. But so you said you never missed a meeting for an entire year.
I never missed a meeting. Never missed the one where they, announced me from the platform, which was, that's a traumatic experience almost, when you're sitting there and there's 300 eyes on you and everybody knows kind of what you did.
Right.
And I don't ever look back on that and make excuses. I know a lot of people got disfellowship for numerous reasons, and they probably make a lot of excuses. It was pretty clear and cut, scenario. And
Right.
I did something that even if you're any religion that you're in, that's frowned upon hugely, obviously, right? So, I was removed, but I made my way back immediately.
So would you say you were you trying to elevate at any point, like during your marital years, were you trying to become a ministerial servant or an elder or anything like that? Or were you doing like I go out in service on Saturdays?
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah, I can honestly say that, it was never in my heart. But that goes across the board. It wasn't just, being a witness wasn't in my heart. I just don't think I ever really truly accepted God in my life, in a the right way. I was, I was going to the church because my mom drug us there, and it was a social, setting for me. All my friends went there. Everybody, that was your whole life. And there was never a time that I truly felt like it was, what I wanted to do. And I only know that now looking back.
Correct.
At the time, you just did what you were doing. You'd auxiliary pioneer in the summer, between when you were off from school, and try to get those 60 hours in, and and we'd go out, pretty much every Saturday or whatever. I'd get my 10 or 12 in for the month. But there was never, I just never really made it my own, as they say.
Make the truth your own. Yeah, that's a whole song from the songbook.
Right. So I never did that, and I don't know. I mean, it was my entire life. So when I was removed from the church, it was, it started the last 20 years for me of just difficulty. I've, had some church trauma about it, even though I accept that, I was responsible for the situation. I made my way back, and then, believe it or not, got remarried again a few years later, at the age of 26, or just about to turn 26. And a lot of this is based upon, obviously, the fact that, like, you get married when you're 19 or 20 because your hormones are raging. You're not able to express that in any way, shape or form, unless it's within the marital bounds. And I understand that that's the way it's, best maybe, but it conflicted with me.
Right.
So I got married again, and once again that lasted 3 years. But believe it or not, like I met that woman on campus at a bar, as I was, had come back, and I was going to the meetings and reinstated. But once again, it just never was truly in my heart. But believe it or not, we dated for the better part of a year, and she came to become a witness.
Yeah.
For me. She did it truly just for me.
Okay.
And she started, studying, and she didn't even tell me. She'd been studying for months until when she told me. Okay. Which was pretty interesting. But in the end, what ended up happening in that scenario is we had been messing around, before we, as we were dating.
Right.
And that came out, as it always inevitably seems to, and I was getting disfellowshipped again for the second time.
And she was just studying at that point.
Correct.
So that brings up other questions in my mind.
She had just gotten baptized when I got disfellowshipped, a month later or so.
But you don't think that possibly it was like her who said anything, or?
Oh, it was.
Oh, it was.
Oh, it absolutely was her that said something, because she was kind of coerced by one of the elders, not brought into the back room and set up, with a formal inquiry, but just it kind of came out in talking.
Yep.
And she slipped up and said too much, and I got hauled back in the back again, and it was double, second offense. Yep. There was no questions asked really to speak of. I got let go again. I actually appealed that, and went before a second committee, and
that's interesting, because not many people have been through the appeal process. So you had 3 elders, and I wanted to say invite. You were told to come to a judicial committee meeting, and then you wanted to appeal that decision. So then you had to go in front of another 3 elders.
Correct.
Now, did any one of the elders from your first judicial meeting show up to the appeal?
Yeah, actually they did.
So was it 6?
It was.
Okay, so it's you versus 6 guys in a room with no witnesses.
Correct. And looking back, there's so many things I could have said now, that I wanted to say. Years later, I had a lot of bitterness about that particular experience, because the first one I knew, was very egregious. The second one, without too much detail, we messed around. We didn't, actually have sex or anything. But I don't know if I reasoned in my heart, that it was not quite as bad as the first time around. But they didn't see it that way. but they grilled her for about 3 hours in the back room.
Yep.
3 men and her. She came out crying. I was sitting in the parking lot. You know, she was bawling. Just a traumatic experience for her. They did not disfellowship her. They publicly reproved her. Of course, everybody from the hall got to hear, you know, that she had been reproved, which you know what happened.
Right.
Everybody immediately knows if I'm getting disfellowship, she's getting reproved. So there's not, you know, much.
So one thing to ask about that, you said you actually met her on campus.
Yeah.
So you were going to college at that point?
No, I wasn't. I just,
Okay.
I lived on campus for a little while with my brother.
Okay.
One of those house with five guys. And,
Okay.
and so, yeah, I wasn't really living, you know, the witness lifestyle.
Right.
I was going to meetings for the most part, keeping up appearances, but her and I were
I did the same thing.
getting together and, you know, messing around and just,
Right.
you know, dating like anybody in the world would. But I was kind of, I guess you could say, living a double life. So, you know, I mean, whether or not I needed to be removed is debatable, but I do know that that particular instance left me in a bitter state then.
Well, because she didn't grow up a Jehovah's Witness. She only began studying because you were a Jehovah's Witness, and she thought that this was a way to grow closer to you, and potentially something that would, you know, have to be dealt with if you guys ever decided you did want to get married. So to go from not growing up a Jehovah's Witness to studying to getting baptized and then being grilled for 3 hours, that's pretty traumatic for someone who's never grown up in a Jehovah's Witness environment, because we are sort of conditioned in a way for a lot of our behavior to be sort of policed in a sense by our community. And it doesn't seem kind of weird to us because it's what we've always known. Same thing happened to my family. My dad did a thing, and then my mom did a thing in revenge, and then they told on each other, and it's just kind of commonplace. You know, whoever says something first gets the lesser of the punishment.
Yeah.
You know, of the two offending parties or whatever. And I don't even like to use that language, but so sorry. You rightfully said that left a bad taste in your mouth.
No, it did with the way it was handled with her. And then I was still in the witness mindset, though, believe it or not, because it was just so ingrained in me. So it was like, well, the right thing to do now is just to marry this girl. I mean, I've been dating her. She changed her life for me, even though we probably should never have gotten married. And you know, so we got married 2 days later, justice of the peace. It was like, you know, I had nowhere to go. I was out on the street, you know, so to speak, socially for the second time. I knew what it was going to be like, and I was like, let's just get married. We got each other.
Yeah.
You know, she was from Dayton. She didn't have her family here. It was just, so we got married immediately. Went to meetings for a month or two, and then it's tough. You know, we were going to a different hall. We didn't know anybody, and you know, we'd both go in and leave at the same time. You know, right at the start, leave right at the end. You know, because she was going to support me. She was going to hang out with everybody. She didn't have friends that weren't my friends. All her friends, you know, were through me, so I was alienated from them. So it was a very difficult start to a marriage. And
so I want to hang out there for a minute, because probably in one of the first videos I ever did where I was just talking about my testimony, that was part of it, was when my mom was disfellowshipped. We would show up after the first song.
Yeah.
And then we would leave before, you know, like right after the prayer, you were out the door. There was occasionally times where we would stick around because we were kids and, you know, we had friends there. But for the most part, it felt wrong for her to go out to the car and for us to not be there with her.
Right.
So in a sense, you know, from a child's perspective, I was kind of in your wife's shoes at that point. And some people who are watching, they might not be familiar with what any of that means. So basically, because he was disfellowshipped, he couldn't be spoken to or speak to anyone in the congregation. So in order to avoid that accidentally happening, a witness will come in late and then they'll leave early. And then that way there's no accidental, you don't even have to say the term, I'm disfellowshipped, I can't talk, or any of that stuff. and your wife was trying to support you in that.
Sure.
And you said that was the beginning of your marriage. That's the first month to 2 months.
Yeah, it was very difficult to begin with.
And different congregation.
Different congregation. It left me in a bitter place, and it left her in a very bitter place also, because she was. It was a very traumatic experience for her to be grilled in front of those men. I know that maybe they don't handle it that way anymore. They probably would have a woman in there. I don't know, or maybe not. But either way, you know, it was just very difficult for both of us, and we only lasted 3 years. Again. So I'm on a hot streak now, 2 in a row, 3 years. And she ended up just moving to Texas, and we said our goodbyes very amicably, actually. And she moved, and the day she left, I never saw her again. She filed for divorce when she was down there. So here I am, you know, just kind of alone in the world. You know, I'm disfellowshipped. Everybody I've known my whole life, you know, is ironically, now as I get older, there's more friends that I had that were witnesses back then that are now disfellowshipped than are still members of the church. So
interesting.
So I hang out with a number of people from back in the day. And then both of my brothers don't go anymore at all. So they're pretty much best friends of mine. And, you know, we always have that kind of bond that we can relate to. But the interesting part about that is my older brother never got baptized. So he's always enjoyed a great relationship with my parents.
There's a loophole there.
That loophole of never technically getting baptized. My younger brother was baptized, but he just stopped going. And if you just stop going in the church, they don't come track you down and see what you're doing. So even though he was doing any of the same things I was doing, he never got, you know, removed. So he enjoyed a great relationship with my family. Both those brothers can go back to the church anytime. They can talk to anybody. They can, you know, come and go as they please. And I've always kind of envied that to some extent, even though it's technicalities. And my parents actually tried to play fair a little bit. For a while, they were like, well, if we're not going to talk to Alex, we're not going to talk to you either. That went over like a lead balloon with the two of them and their wives, and it created a lot of bitterness with the wives and stuff. And so that it just didn't last very long.
Because it's arbitrary. It's hard to find that standard. And it's kind of like any rational person's like, well, why are we doing any of this then?
So, but that was a situation that, you know, a lot of people can be bitter maybe at parents and very bitter with, even though I was bitter with certain members of the church, I was never bitter with my parents. And they always treated me pretty respectfully. And I knew that, you know, they loved me to death. They just, you know, wanted me to come back. And that was unfortunately about the only relationship I ever had with my mom since I was mid-20s till she passed away, you know, 2 years ago, was anytime I'd see her, there might be a little comment. You know, hey, I just really wish you'd come back. And that would be about all. That was the only thing she could ever kind of whisper under her breath, you know, to me. Didn't matter what accolade that I could, you know, have in life or what, you know, thing that I could accomplish, you know, and I get it. She was, you know, trying to follow to the letter, the law, you know, but, you know, she was very adamant about, you know, not really doing much of anything ever, you know, around me. I had my daughter 7 years ago, and she would then come around.
That is good
for my daughter, you know. And they would come over. My parents would come over to my house, watch her, and I would just kind of make myself scarce, just so that it was not uncomfortable for them. Say hi, you know, and I'd just go do, you know, paperwork or something. I never wanted to make them feel awkward. Never wanted to put them in a compromising position for their faith. But there was at least a little bit of, that I could see them on occasion when they'd show up at the door,
Right.
for my daughter, and I could give them instructions and help them out with things here or there. But it was, that's what that was about.
Right.
Them coming over, to be with her. So, yeah, that's kind of where we're at now. My mom passed away, and my father, has same thing. I'll take my daughter over there, and he'll watch her and enjoy a grandfather, grandchild experience for the day or whatever. Sometimes I'll stick around and kind of make myself scarce over there. I don't always drop off and leave, but
Right.
I try to never put him in a compromising place where he has to feel awkward.
Right.
But that's one of those things I've always kind of struggled with. And any woman I've ever had a long-term relationship with, marriage or or dating, they have struggled so badly with this concept. It's always just been, well, you should just go talk to them. You should, I can't believe they would, be that way with you. If you just went and talked to them, you could probably, repair this relationship.
So they're thinking that there's some reconcilable difference, and they're
Right.
just not understanding the kind of group that you
Right.
You were very close to being born in. I mean, 5 years old coming into it is pretty much, it's completely out of your hands. You even said 12 years old is when you got baptized. I mean, I was never baptized. So
Okay.
I am one of your brothers that you
Right.
felt a little bit unfair about. So what that means is certain members of my family will still talk to me, even though I'm technically a heathen in their eyes, because I never got baptized. So we get to enjoy that loophole of, well, he's just still a little bit lost, that sort of thing. So people that you've interacted with, or like you said, any ladies that you've had a long-term relationship with, have been just utterly confused about
Bitter,
relationship.
angry about it. I mean, very, upset with my parents. Have not enjoyed a good relationship with them. Because of that, just been very upset about it. And I even for a moment there, off and on, for the last 20 some years, of course, there have been times when I've thought about just going back, just to try to get back just so I could have that relationship with my parents again. Because late night laying in bed, or shower thoughts of, I could probably make my way back. I could probably go for whatever, a year, and get reinstated. People do it all the time, I'm sure, and then just kind of drift off and don't come anymore, and then they can,
Talk to their family.
But for me, of all the stuff I've done over the years that I've felt guilty about, or hypocritical about, or things that I, am not proud of, that's one thing that I, have tried to stick to my guns about. Like, I'm not gonna do that. I do still believe in, in God, and I believe that that's not something that He would probably have, smiled upon, me just doing that. So there is always this, I think something that former witnesses battle with when I've talked to people over the years is that, there's something it's so ingrained in you that, you still believe so much of what you were taught.
Yep.
And whether that's just Bible fundamentals, or whether it's a situation like that. I mean, when I pray, I still use the name Jehovah, and I don't believe that, Jesus is God. And, there's so many things that I still, keep to this day. But I never wanted to try to just go back.
Right.
Just for the heck of it.
Right.
To be able to speak with the family. So.
Yeah, so I was going to say, earlier you had said something about your daughter expressing interest in, she's 8 years old, and expressing interest in baptism, you said you feel a certain kind of way about that now, knowing what you know and looking back at the just the situation. But do you see any differences between like the church that you're attending now and like if your daughter was to be baptized just at the church that you go to? Do you think she would suffer the same repercussions if she ever came to you when she was 18 and said, "Dad, you know what? I don't believe anymore"?
Right.
Do you think she would suffer the same repercussions from her baptism that you suffered from yours?
Absolutely not. So just a quick background is that, I didn't do anything with church for 20 some years. I've actually just started going back in the last few months to a non-denominational church that I've enjoyed. Basically just the lead pastor is very good. The message has spoken to me. Not really involved in the church much, but go every Sunday. Take my daughter with me when she's with me, and there's some religious people from her school. The one, her little friend had gotten baptized at her church, and so she's talked about it. But of course, I don't believe in any way, shape, or form that she has any true understanding about what it really means.
Right.
So I want to get baptized again one of these days because I feel like the first time was just a formality.
Right.
Completely didn't mean much of anything to me. But I want to do it when it truly speaks to me. And I think, for her, I'm not going to hold her back per se, but I try to explain those things to her that she needs to have an understanding of what it truly means. But no, if she, decides to do just about anything she wants to do, that's a situation that I'm always going to support her, no matter what choices that she makes in life. And I think that's what a loving parent does, but it's also definitely indicative of the fact that, it was not that way for me. So I want to make sure that she doesn't experience some of those same kind of traumas, if we want to call it that, that I feel I have in the last, during that period of my life. And it's definitely followed me for years. I think it has affected the way I interact with people in general. It's definitely affected the way I interact with romantic, relationships. Unfortunately, I think in some ways it has devalued the way I have in the past looked at relationships with people. That whole concept that I grew up with all these super close friends that were all my best friends, and then that just was flushed down the toilet in an instant, followed me to the point where sometimes I took for granted people's friendships. And I felt like, you'd think it might have the opposite. Like you would hold on to these relationships. But for me, it almost taught me that you could, people repeat their parents' bad behavior.
Yep.
I'm not saying that my parents taught me that per se, but I'm just saying that, even when something's not quite the right thing to do, it was okay for them, so I guess it's okay for me. And I know I've done that over the years, just kind of thrown away relationships that could have been, really great because it was in some way modeled for me. And I hate making excuses and pointing fingers and saying, I do this because they did it to me. But at the same time, I know when reflecting that that's the only reason, because I'm like, why would I have done that? Why do I, cheapen some of these relationships that I've had over the years? And I think that that's played a huge part. And
well, I think it can be both. I like that you're trying to take some partial responsibility for it, but because I think there's some people who lean too heavily in either direction. It's all me. I always ruin relationships. It has nothing to do with my upbringing, which I just don't agree with. And I think there's the other party that everything is exclusively because this was the environment I was raised in.
Right.
Therefore, I have no control over it. And I think there's a little bit of both. What some people who didn't grow up inside of this group or inside of any group that has this level of control over so many aspects of your life. I mean, you're talking like your entire community. You know, at a certain point, you had even used the term, I was almost like homeless, because it's like I didn't have anyone to go to once I was outside of the group, right?
Right.
But yeah, it has a big effect. A lot of these people were best friends. You did share great memories. You know, it was almost like a family type relationship. And then when that's completely cut off because one of my behaviors you don't agree with, or you're told not to agree with it, it makes everything feel very conditional.
Yeah.
And I think relationship wise, it's like, well, if I do the right thing, you'll love me, but if I do the wrong thing, you won't love me. And that leaks into other relationships. It certainly can. And that's typically not what a friendship relationship is.
Correct.
So it just, I think it's a product of both the upbringing, and yeah, there's some personal culpability there at the same time, but it's not all on you. You know, a lot of that is the environment that you grew up in. So it's a hard thing to describe to anyone who hasn't grown up in it.
Yeah, I've always tried to take responsibility. I know that, you know, you signed up for it. It's like, I always say that to me, I knew what the consequences for my poor actions, you know, in my early 20s with my first, I knew what the consequences were. It's not like, you know, that I hadn't been taught. But at the same time, you're not really ever taught, you know, you're not taught, but you're not ever really prepared for really what the fallout is truly going to be.
Right.
And even if you're not a witness, I'm sure there's plenty of people that are kind of shunned by family and friends if they do something that everybody doesn't agree with, but not necessarily maybe to this extent.
Yeah.
By any means, or the whole concept with the parent thing. I'm sure they can work their way back into the good graces of family and friends, even if they hurt people and let them down. But not in this situation. You're not working your way back into the good graces unless you know, specifically do one thing. And that's not been something I've been able to bring myself to do. But it is nice to finally actually, you know, in going back to church, have looked at it like as doing something for me. And I think having a child, you know, changes your perspective on things. She's getting to the point where you want her to have some sort of relationship with God and start to know God. But it's mostly been for me. Something has been missing in my life. And so I wanted to go back, and I didn't want to go back to being a witness. I wanted to go back to doing something that was truly for me. Okay. And I've so far found something that I'm gravitating towards.
Good.
So that's just been huge for me recently.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, so how has going to this non-denominational church that you've found now, how did you find them? And I guess how has it changed your perspective on maybe faith in general, from like what you grew up, you know, learning to what you understand about it now? Has it changed anything for you?
Yeah, and I just was introduced by a friend that just recommended, check it out. It goes there, and I immediately enjoyed what they were all about, and the lead pastor, like I said, is just very phenomenal, and it has helped me to, you know, the Witness Church is very works oriented. Even though they might not say that on paper, that's kind of what was always ingrained. Like, you got to get a certain amount of hours.
Yeah.
You got to, you know, get a certain amount of answers. Your hand up a certain amount of times. You got to, you know, did you study your Watchtower? Did you study your, you know, ministry school book? Did you study your, you know, there's always like this very rigid, you know, situation. And now, of course, as an adult, there's nobody telling me what to do. There's nobody telling me I have to do something. So it certainly feels more genuine, any effort I put in.
Right.
But it has helped me to realize that it's more that, you know, we are already saved if we accept, the Word and God into our life. What we're doing past that is expressing that. We're not gonna get anywhere buy our way into God's good graces. We're already, He died for our sins so we could already be there.
Yep.
If we, can accept that. And so it's been just a different perspective for me, and it's been very therapeutic, and it's been very inviting. And for me, making changes in my life for the better I'm not trying to make, anybody else happy. Parents or friends or elders that are coming to me, there really is no punishment if I choose not to, to follow. If I choose, that I'm not going to do all the rigid things that I was always taught before. There's no immediate punishment, right? You have to figure out for yourself, like, okay, I need to get myself back in line. Nobody's telling me to do that.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's what truly feels good is to be able to, do this path on your own, and without fear per se of consequence or people, shunning you or, nobody over there is judging me.
Right.
So
right.
there's only one person that's gonna, there's only one that's gonna judge me.
Yeah.
And that'll be, one of these days. So
Absolutely.
it's been a very positive thing for me.
So it definitely sounds like it's changed your relational aspect to God, because like we were talking about before, when it was your relationships with best friends, community members, stuff like that, people who were a part of your circle could suddenly somehow act almost like you don't exist. If they saw you in a grocery store or something, it's like not even are you not there, but I'm going to look away to make sure that you're not there.
Right.
Because you did something that we don't agree with, so now therefore you don't exist. And it's like, but it was kind of almost trained that way with God too. It was like, because I felt this way after I left the group. Again, I told you I was kind of indifferent. I didn't really study or pray or care. I was just sort of like stagnant. I was indifferent to it. And then I remember, if I looked at something I shouldn't look at, and I would get a flat tire. Oh, well, God's cursing me today, and if I did the right thing, and something good happened, well, God's blessing me today. And it was this very much a get type relationship,
Right.
And it trains you in that relational aspect of like, well, I've got to do something nice to get something in return. And it always feels like an exchange. Whereas what you described was, no, I've already been saved, and as an outflow of that, as an expression of that, I do good things. But it's not to earn any sort of merit.
The interesting thing for me is that I struggle with always second guessing my reasons for doing stuff now. If I want to put in extra effort, it's always this little thing in the back of my mind going, are you doing this for the right reason, or are you doing this because and maybe everybody does this, I don't know, because you think this is going to buy you some good graces with God.
I got you.
Like, do I tithe at the church, or do I give of my skills to, my electrical work? They ask me, like, hey, we have need all the time in all of our branches to do, different skills, like skilled labor. Like, would you? Like, yeah, absolutely. But for some reason, it's like ingrained in my mind that, like, it's very difficult for me to just do it and enjoy doing it and feel like I'm truly giving out of the goodness of my heart. It's always just in the back of my mind is, what's the reason I'm doing this for? And if, is this gonna buy me a few more tokens into the promised land?
Right.
So I don't know if that's a byproduct of being a witness or not, or if that's just me being me. But I'm trying to get past that and just do things because they're the right thing to do.
Right.
and give out of the goodness of my heart. And so I've definitely been on kind of a mission in the last so many months, and I'm hoping to continue those positive vibes, that positivity, and working forward towards being in a better place, because it's felt way better than it always did years ago.
Yeah.
And I do have quite a few friends that are ex-witnesses, and my brothers that are very supportive, to me. And so to have that same, to be able to, talk about all those old things and all the people from back in the day. And, you always have those memories and that support system. I know probably a lot of people that are disfellowshipped don't have that, and maybe they gravitate towards others that were disfellowshipped too, which we obviously are doing because we have, such a similarity.
That shared experience, yeah.
For sure. A lot of traumatic stuff involved, and kind of working through a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Still. And actually go to a Christian counselor a couple times a month, and he's amazing.
Yeah.
I think he's ordained from God. He's just been amazing, helping me to kind of work through some of those past traumas, and help me to see that there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Right.
When you've been hurt and hurt others. I mean, I have a lot of guilt, and shame for sure.
Yeah.
Church hurt, church guilt, and for things that I've done. I've hurt people over the years. I've been selfish. I can absolutely admit that. But like I said, having a child and being, finally trying to make choices for yourself as opposed to doing it for mom.
Yeah.
That always, was behind you, whispering in your ear. It never felt like it was for me.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting that you said there was, of course, there was some church hurt and trauma, but then you were like, but I've been selfish in some way too, or in some ways as well. But that's funny because immediately as you said that, I already thought of a situation where because of my selfishness, I ended up hurting someone else, and it directly had something to do with the religion or the faith system. So no one completely comes out unscathed. I even had a good childhood growing up as a Jehovah's Witness. It wasn't like it was all bad, and I learned some great public speaking skills, and there was a lot of good that came from it. I would say that you and I have that shared experience. There's some people who have more, maybe possibly traumatic experience with it, but
Sure.
The type of hurt that you've experienced from your family not talking to you can't be minimized, because it's very uncharacteristic of just humanity in general. But I at least like hearing the difference now in kind of like where you started when you grew up and like kind of where you find yourself now. It is pretty cool, and it's a pretty stark contrast. But it kind of seems like it's taken you a little while to get there, and you're still on the path.
Right. Yeah, I've just a side note that's pretty personal. All those years of not having my mom, in my life, and she passed from cancer 2 years ago. Ironically, I always made that joke to my parents. Well, this is great because, I'll finally get to have a relationship with you one of these days when I'm, changing your diaper.
Yeah.
Because there's certain gray areas where you're allowed now to have a relationship again if there's a family member that's sick, And I get that to some extent, right? They don't want you. My dad's aging too, and he'll need care unless he passes as fast as my mom did. One of these days he will need care, and I'll be there.
Yeah.
And it's not that he or my mom never wanted to be there. I'm sure they would have.
Right.
If I came down with cancer, they probably would have been there, every day for me.
Right.
But they couldn't. And ironically, I probably will, get that relationship. I, kind of rekindled that a little bit in those last couple months that I'd go see my mom, every couple days when she was laying in bed wasting away.
Right.
So, I have a lot of sadness involved with that scenario because it's like I never I never got to actually have a good relationship with her. I only knew her now, in the last 20 some years. As you're growing up, a lot of times you don't have a great relationship. You don't appreciate your parents. You don't sit down and talk about deep things when you're a teenager, and you do that when you get a little older. And I didn't have that, and of course I got it when she was dying.
Right.
So that's one of the things that's kind of ironic about that situation. But and I hope my dad lives a long life. But I do, in some weird, sick, twisted way, look forward to having a relationship with him one of these days when he's unable to take care of himself.
Right.
Which is, a sad thought per se, but I look forward to it.
Yeah. No, it's not.
Not him being sick, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
So.
It's not weird at all. And it just, I think probably one of the things for me, like when I left the group and I was still trying to hold on to certain thoughts and teachings and behaviors and stuff like that, I was saying, okay, where can I find this? And is it actually in the teachings? Is it in the scripture anywhere? Can I find it? So of course you can't find the secret meetings in the back rooms. Everything was always done in front of at the city gates, in public, so that there was always witnesses for everyone involved. There was no secret meetings. There was no public declaration of this person's no longer part of the group. There was no treating people like they didn't exist. And in the case of repentance and faith, I forget who pointed this out to me, but it was the prodigal son. And whoever the pastor was that was talking about it said, did you realize that in the story of the prodigal son, the father started running to the son before the son even apologized? Like as soon as he saw his son, he began to run towards him. His son hadn't said, I failed you. I just want to be one of your workers. I'm sorry. None of that. All he did was see him and run to him. Right. So there wasn't even that showing up, that repentance, and then, okay, well, son, you've got to work in my fields for six months to a year or something like that. It's gone. It's absent from the story. So It was just like, I was trying to look at what the group does and trying to fit it into what I see Jesus saying, and I couldn't see it, anymore. So that was one of the things for me. So it totally makes sense to me what you're saying about just wanting that relationship with your dad, and we'll share a little bit more off camera because I've got some stuff I want to tell you about that too with my own father. But is there anything else that you would leave people off with? Because already, like as you and I were chatting, you would say hand raising and Watchtower and this, and just hearing the language again is just kind of fun, for me, to hear from someone else who uses it so fluently. It's almost like a language that we share. But is there anything that you would leave anyone off with? I already think your story's been encouraging, but any last thoughts?
Well, I mean, oh geez, that's a tough one. I mean, like I said, my upbringing was, I don't know what the percentage of people raised as a witness have an upbringing like I did, where I truly felt like I couldn't have had much of a better upbringing than I had, as far as just friends and just a support system. So having that yanked away from me may have been more aggressive than some people. But I guess for me, the only thing positive, the positive message maybe here towards the end of this, is that I struggled for years, with 20 plus years, with just being kind of in a weird place with it. And I suppress it. I bury it, and I go about my business with work and, just doing whatever I'm doing, and I do think that kind of came back to haunt me. Like I feel like I kind of wasted years of my life to some extent, not moving forward and not being productive, not necessarily, needing pills for depression per se, but just, I guess you didn't really ask for advice stuff, but
No, whatever comes
but
to
if
mind.
there is some of that trauma to try to deal with it sooner than later, because I do feel like for me, and maybe it just took that long. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know, but I will say that if I could have, explored that a little deeper sooner, I think that would have been very positive for me.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes in life you just need a specific catalyst or a specific event, to kick that off, and that, that actually kind of happened for me. But but that would be my thing, just dealing with something sooner than later. I'm a procrastinator. It's not going to go away. It's no matter how much you bury yourself in relationships or children or your work or just fun.
Yeah.
There's still always going to be something in the back of your mind if you have some sort of hurt with that came from it, that I believe is going to hold you back from making progress potentially without addressing it in the future. And I went back and told people, I said I was sorry.
Yeah.
To people that I felt had hurt me.
Yeah.
And that was the only way. I still got a couple people on the list
Yeah.
that I'm struggling with. I don't even know if they'd want to hear from me.
Right.
But people that either I wronged or people that I felt wronged me, but like that I really truly just had to reach out to and have a discussion with.
Yeah.
And even my own mother, as she was literally like, couldn't talk, or, right at the end, I was whispering in her ear, telling her the things that I wanted to hear.
Yep.
Which were like, you were a good mother, and thank you, and you did an amazing job. I wanted to hear those things. I wanted to hear, I still love you no matter what you did, or things of that nature. But it was healing for me to effectively say the things I wanted to hear to her.
Yep.
And let her know that, like, I forgive you.
Yep.
For anything that any hurt you may have caused me. So that was like hugely therapeutic for me to do. And so, yeah, I mean, not to be cliche or whatever, but just to air out your grievances if you have them.
Yeah.
And let people know how you feel. I suppose whether that's good or bad. And if it's bad, that as in like, approaching somebody and saying, here's what you did to me, and here's, I need to address that with you. Maybe they won't listen, I don't know. But for me, I was way past that part.
Yeah.
It was just, hey, I'm sorry. And, like, because I felt like I had hurt maybe more people than had hurt me over the years. So, just moving on and trying to kind of clean the slate off.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Well, you may not be a psychiatrist, but you're a student of life and you're a father. And I can't imagine a psychiatrist giving a better answer than that of your problems are always going to be there until you deal with them.
Right.
So you can do anything you want. You can move, you can occupy yourself with work, you can occupy yourself with hobbies, but your problems will still be there. And so you better address them sooner than later. And I think that's an amazing answer. And the fact that you've been willing and wanting to get counseling for, again, the situation that you described with your mother, like I told her all the things I wanted to hear. That's the nature of forgiveness, is you're absorbing the cost. Okay, maybe there was some hurt. You wrecked my vehicle, so to speak, so I'm going to pay for the damages, though. I won't make you pay for them. And that's what you did, and that's wonderful advice.
Yeah. That, and then, of course, being a witness, you were always taught that there's nothing out there for you. Mm-hmm. There's nothing but hurt and pain if you leave. And there's a lot of hurt and pain in this life in general.
Yeah.
But I've made some absolutely amazing friends who would not leave, me for probably just about anything.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, pretty important too, that there are great people out there that are not associated with the church. And I've had some of the best friendships I've ever had now. And like I said, people that just have stuck through kind of thick and thin for me through my ups and downs. And so I guess that's just maybe one last point too, is that that yeah, there's life after.
Yeah.
After, church hurt in general, and that probably goes for just about any, denomination out there that you may be, shunned from, if you want to use that word or whatever. So,
Yeah. That's amazing. Alex, this was perfect. Seriously. I think
Thank you.
this hearing your story is, again, it's going to be relatable to a lot of people, but it's also going to be helpful just because, again, that was something it was like online therapy for me. It's just hearing people who had grew up, sharing the same experiences I had and walking away with different conclusions, but seeing people navigate through it. So I honestly want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. And, hopefully in the future we'll get to do something again.
yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, man.
I appreciate
you.
Truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God.